Corporate Transparency Act.
Well, I feel like this should be good content about what is
Well,
this Corporate Transparency Act? You got me worried.
it's just anyone. So I'll just give you the rundown.
Yeah.
Anyone that has an LLC, anyone that's a part of that company that owns 25% or more has significant rights or benefits to this company, have to fill out this. It's called a BOI report, business something information report. And basically, they have to give up their personal information, a picture of their driver's license or passport, all their personal stuff like, physical address, full name, all that. And it has to be submitted to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network website. So if you start an LLC after January 1, 2024, you have 30 days to comply with this. Otherwise, you get fined up to $500 a day civilly. Criminally is $10,000 or 2 years, up to 2 years in prison. But if you create your entities prior to January 1, then you have a full year to register on their website before those penalties kick in. So in order to save yourself from having to fill out this information in a bugged website that's got 4, 10, 12 million people on it, if you get a year of buy time, so if you need to create an entity or dissolve one, you should probably do that before the end of the year.
So what is the purpose of the new
It's
regulation?
to reduce money laundering, tax evasion, terrorist financing, things of that nature.
They didn't have mechanisms in place to already reduce those? So
They do. Here's what they said. They are subjecting this to pretty much most small businesses. If you look, like, you read between the lines, because they have exemptions. Like, well, who's exempt from having to fill out this information? Government agencies, any entity that aids a government agency, banks, financial institutions like the credit card companies, CPAs, they don't have to fill those out. Any business that does $5 million or more in gross receipts or top line revenue, has 20 plus full-time employees, and has one or more physical locations is exempt from having to fill this out.
So they believe that money for criminal activity is funneled through smaller businesses, and they assume that if you have a larger business, then you're going to have other oversights that will make you less prone to being nefarious.
Correct. And also that you wouldn't have to disclose who is receiving benefit from the entity.
Oh, so there's the concern about political eliteness, corporate elitism, and why they get to be exempt when the small man has to jump through more hoops.
Correct. And every entity you create after January 1. So the way this attorney...
Every entity, even large ones?
Well, if they meet that requirement, 5 million or more, 20,
then
you're okay.
So big celebration the day you meet 5 million or more.
Yeah, but it's like if you have 10 LLCs that produce total 5, you have to...
Count.
It doesn't count. It has to be that single entity. So it's really strange. I don't know the workarounds yet, but it was brought to my attention on Wednesday.
All right. Well, that's a pretty good segue into today's conversation. Because I wanted to talk about the tiny anchors that, on the face of it, don't seem that malignant. But when you really start to examine the small stressors, sometimes placed on us by things like this entity, this act, or things that we are self-inflicting, then how that reduces our overall performance, right? Like death by 1,000 tiny anchors, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed for myself, it takes something very small, let's say self-talk. I say something negative about myself, and then it just spirals from there into every area of my life,
Yeah, I think I do know. I mean, lately I've recognized that certain ideas that I have about who I am are not healthy and moving my life forward, for instance. That if I'm a businessman, then that looks a certain way, and that if it doesn't look that way, then there's something wrong with me. And that kind of, like, I did a video today about fitting in versus belonging, and I guess I was talking more about relationships, but in a way, I want to fit into a certain community that I think is going to reap me benefits. And if I don't fit in, then, kind of like what we talked about earlier, it's like I want to be more perfectionistic about it. And one thing I didn't speak about, though, was how perfectionism is actually the death of success because it prohibits you from being flexible.
Mm. Ooh,
And that
that's good.
people who are perfectionistic are wanting to fit in, they want to belong, they want to have a tribe, they want to feel safe.
So fitting in and belonging makes you feel safe.
Yeah, because we're social animals.
And so then I would speculate then when things change, environments change, we also have to adjust. Meaning you may belong now or feel like you belong now, but maybe something changes in your personality or your life and maybe something changes in someone else's life. How do you be flexible and not think that this belonging in this moment is perfect and I don't have to change it?
So as things shift, rather than adhere to old ideas of what should be, how are you sufficiently flexible so you don't like self-destruct? You know, I went through that recently, actually, with an employee who left that I loved dearly, great employee, um, but it was time for that person to move on. And I was perfectly fine with that. A perfectionist, I think, would probably do a lot of self-blaming. They did something wrong. They could have done something better. The organizational process could have been improved. I'm not saying that you don't need to self-reflect. I'm just saying that by virtue of doing that, you put yourself in an inflexible place because sometimes the truth is things live and they die.
Right.
Businesses have patterns, human beings have patterns. Everything is constantly in a state of degeneration. Everything that we do is intended to push back against decomposition. That includes businesses, that includes our physical health.
Yeah.
So I guess to answer your question about how do you push back, like how do you not like self-destruct, I guess there's a form of acceptance that you just don't always have control.
Doesn't it I feel it produces like this um it's like a dance of thinking, right? We want to strive for perfection, but for what? I think maybe we assign meaning to that.
Yeah.
However, knowing that life is always changing, what then is that meaning we assign to the change, and how do we reason that to be okay? Because I think we strive for perfection for so long, we hold on to this idea, and it's like life has changed so much that that idea is now completely different. It looks different.
That's a really good point. Like, yeah, life is always changing. I did ask, what was the utility of actually meeting your goal? I tend to see things through a mirror of the ultimate change, which is death. I mean, this sounds very morbid, I know. But I think it's real. It's everything we're doing throughout our life in a way is kind of either trying to prepare or offset that inevitability. And that's something unique to human beings.
Mm.
And we get so invested in something, sometimes to a perfectionistic quality. We seek out information so much, like financial gurus. We're constantly distracting ourselves with moving forward, doing better, being more, to move away from the ultimate change. And that is the change from life to death.
And facing it.
Yeah.
So we'll do anything we can to avoid that. Hold on to things too long, perhaps. Not allow. I think about it in my own ways of being very self-critical when it comes to change, of feeling like we talked some time ago about you feeling safe to fail in the gym
No,
because
no.
versus being out in an endeavor that you're not as comfortable with, or maybe you can't control that failure as much, like perception of other people, let's say, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the gym is a place to kind of explore what your limits are for me. And when you feel that your body being pushed, it is a very visceral reminder that not only is there a goal, but you know you can go past that goal and you can do yourself injury and harm. and it's a bit of a metaphor for life too, really. Um, but I guess the tiny anchors that probably limit my productivity have to do mostly with, which you kind of hit on it, was like limiting self-talk
Yeah.
and I wouldn't call myself a perfectionist, but I definitely like things to be a certain way, whatever that means. Controlling? I don't know.
I think we all desire, I think we associate the control with self-expression, of like, we want to be able to express ourselves, but also to have other people get it, to be understood. And I think that could kind of be a controlling thing.
If I were honest with myself, my controlling nature comes from not having a lot of control when I was younger and believing that the only way I was going to get out of my circumstances of living in a children's home, the only way I was going to be able to get through paying for boarding school out of my pocket, the only way I was going to, get the affection of other people was if I manipulated it. And so I would assume that most people's control comes out of a desire for stability. And the truth is, there's no such thing as stability, I don't think. There's what you have directly in front of you and the best decision that you can make with the resources that you have. And if you get too emotional, then you can cloud your ability to access the resources. But you also can't become so intellectual that you suppress the emotions, that you have to learn to let yourself sit in the feelings.
Mm. Yeah. I'm learning, what happens for me is I go into resistance when it's time to feel my emotions. I'm like, and then I perpetuate those feelings for a longer period of time, perhaps, rather than allowing the emotion to surface and then moving on and saying like, oh, that sucked, or that was okay. It is what it is. I'm not going to judge myself for feeling that emotion. That's not my initial reaction.
What's your initial reaction?
I'm bad or I'm wrong for having this emotion, and having to feel that is hindering me from my ability to perform
So you put a judgment on it pretty quick.
immediately.
It's a signal to you about what your worth is.
Well, it was also too, where I go like root level with it is, growing up, I felt that if I felt emotions, I would be judged pretty heavily for them and told to maybe like straighten up and just
Fly
carry
right.
on,
Yeah.
you know? And so I learned to say, okay, well, if that's the reaction that I have to have, straighten up and carry on, then I'll do that. But I won't feel those emotions. I won't allow them to surface.
Yeah. Man, you can approach that from so many different angles. So you were just merely being compliant, whereas I did not ever see the utility of feeling. I didn't understand what its purpose was or what I was supposed to do with it. So you feel something, okay, unless it's just extreme and bothersome, it's not really going to change circumstances. The only way I ever changed circumstances was just by, like, I wouldn't say like manipulation in the nefarious sense of the word, but manipulating in my environment, and controlling it, taking hold of it. So that's interesting. It's a very different approach than how you did it. Like yours doesn't sound near as, although from what I know about you, as you got into adolescence, it started to turn into something less benign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I was always told that I was a bad kid. And only until I got older did I begin to let go of that label and realize that I was a peculiar kid. I was different, but I wasn't a bad kid. I behaved poorly at times. Got kicked out of every school until I was like 7th grade, and then I remember my social worker. I was going to say the principal, but he probably did too tell me this. But the social worker sitting me down and saying, "They will never let you back into that school." And I said, "You're wrong. I'm their best tennis player." And I got reaccepted. And yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, I knew people. I knew what they wanted.
Right.
And I wasn't so bad that, I wouldn't like a tremendously, star talent or anything like that. I was just a good tennis player, and they just wanted good people, right? But it, and that was the first time I actually stayed in the same location for a long time. And it was also the first time that I started to let myself feel my feelings because I was in a safe place.
Ooh,
I mean, I was at a
good.
children's home, Louisiana Baptist Children's Home, and it did tremendous things for my spiritual and my emotional development.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. I I think about what you said, creating a safe space, or feeling safe
yeah,
enough to release like maybe the anxiety or the on edge
yeah,
feeling, so that you could feel emotions. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I think about that when I understand how people avoid dealing with their emotions or life by, let's say, watching TV, or we're checking out somehow on social media, let's say. Um, we are perpetually creating that state of anxiety and not a comfort place to feel our emotions until like the anchors add up to the point where it's like, I got to deal with this now.
yeah.
I'm overrun by these emotions. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I didn't think about it from that angle. That's a good point. Like, we distract ourselves with all of this technology. They're like little tiny anchors that are attached to our flesh and then pull everything down, and you wonder why you're moving around sluggishly because you don't feel like you're in a safe place. If I've got to look at another meme of a male model that really introduces some insecurity, right? Or another picture or video of a beautiful woman that I think is unattainable, not that I'm searching, obviously, but the point is made that it's always the unattainable that's put in front of our eyes. So why wouldn't society be more insecure? And the worst part about it is that it's all, like, behavioral science has been nailed down so precisely that, and as being a behaviorist myself and knowing what the science is, it is so dismaying to know that they have taken these truths about who we are as people and just turned them in on us for pure profit.
Yeah. Exploiting it to, I mean, you think about the algorithms on all the social media apps. I mean, they're just putting what you want to see in front of you.
It's like millions of tiny anchors. And of course, the trope is, in and of itself, they're not bad. And I agree.
Right.
Obviously, I'm doing this and other stuff. But coming around to that place and saying, well, you can't be on the back burner forever if you really want to make a difference. And I think a lot of people are coming around to that. I've read somewhere recently that the amount of frivolous content is decreasing, and that platforms like YouTube, which requires, really great talent to do really, really well on that, and rightfully so, I think. But platforms like YouTube, informational platforms and stuff like that, it takes a lot. The barrier to entry is a lot greater than it used to be.
Mm. Yeah.
You have to actually it's kind of like a self-filtering process that the people who are just crap, they just fall off, and the people who are sincere, even if you don't agree with them, at least they're sincere. So I guess maybe there's like maybe not all is doomed, right? There's like a corrective system built into it. You just got to mud through the crap first. Like we did
Yeah.
for like 10, 15 years or whatever it was that YouTube was on. You grew up on YouTube, didn't you?
Yeah.
How,
When did YouTube came about? Like 2010?
something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. I was more of the online gamer. And then, yeah, YouTube came about, and it was all about the music videos. It moved from MTV to YouTube.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That was kind of like the big draw for me, at least originally.
Yeah.
I wasn't even privy to like people doing like vlogs and all that. Like, no idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's vast now.
Yeah.
No, when I was a kid, I wasn't even given an N64. I guess my dad didn't want those little tiny anchors to discourage me. I guess I say N64. I wasn't even given an Atari. That's how old I am. And not that I'm that old. That's the whole. I hate that saying. I'm so old. I remember when Atari was. I mean, whatever. So I used to go down. So my neighbor, we lived out in the country, sort of, kind of, not really, but I'd have to walk maybe a quarter of a mile to the next trailer. I didn't grow up in a trailer, but that was the next home near me, and they had a Nintendo, and I was the kind of kid that I would literally, like, even if my friends weren't home, I'd knock on the door, and I'd be like, "Can I play your Nintendo?"
Yep, I was the same way.
And I would walk in, and I would sit, and I'd play that thing for 8 hours.
Yep.
Of course, my friends would be nowhere around.
And
I
you didn't care at all.
I could care less
Yeah.
that I was being very invasive. Um, completely disconnected from reality now
Oh, yeah.
as a kid.
I was literally the exact same way. Like I had a buddy whose his house typically like his parents like left the front door unlocked. So and he always had people over, and I would just like walk in, I'm like hey, and I like announce that I'm there, and then I'm just go right in his room, play video games, and
Oh my God, as I think
like I think about that now, like wow, imagine if
I'm like, you get shot. You get shot. 10-year-old shot entering home. Suspected burglar.
oh my
He was wearing a hoodie.
yeah,
He was wearing a green and navy hoodie. He's dead.
his dying words were I just wanted to play video
I
games.
just wanted love. I wanted video games. Mario, rescue me.
Yeah, that's funny. I didn't know. Yeah,
You weren't alone
yeah,
in your ridiculousness.
yeah.
I know.
I didn't think it was so ridiculous at the time.
No,
I was like,
no.
this is totally harmless.
Totally harmless.
Yeah.
And maybe it was in, I guess, early 2000s. It certainly was in the early 90s and late 80s. So how do you tie that back into dysfunctional childhood? No, I think that just speaks to a person's openness and agreeableness, and those are two very important traits for growth that's been identified with the Big Five Ocean Theory. I think Jordan Peterson talks a lot about that. But openness and agreeableness go a long way. Being open to experiences and so forth. And I guess that begins when you're young, just walking randomly into people's homes. But as adults, we probably would do a lot better to being less restricted and more open and flexible and kind of recapturing some of that early childhood naivete.
The wonder,
Yeah.
like, yeah.
And one thing I know, obviously, is children tend to be a little bit more emotional for neurocognitive reasons, of course. But I don't think it's just that. I think it's because they don't have as many layers that tell them not to be.
Yeah.
And that's important.
It's interesting. There's Kanye West said something like, a kid's jumping on a coffee table or standing on a coffee table. He's told by his parents to get off of the coffee table. But for him, he thinks like he's being a superhero and he's just like getting the high ground on the coffee table to jump off or whatever.
Right.
But it's like the society puts these confinements on us, right? And I think that it's like a limit. You're put into this limit of how to act and behave, and it's self-sustaining at this point.
Yeah, it becomes so deeply ingrained that it becomes second nature to just find ways to limit yourself. Like
Yeah.
society doesn't even have to do it anymore at some point. Right. And like the kid who's on the coffee table, listen, probably not the best place, but that doesn't mean you don't need to find things to climb on and jump off of. You just need to have a little bit more foresight. But don't ever stop climbing and jumping.
Yes.
As Kanye apparently has not done.
Yeah.
But that kind of, I think there's a reason that the Bible says, be like little children, and there's a wisdom in that,
Yeah.
the innocence, the openness, the exploration, the acceptance, the forgiveness, and of course, not just with others, but with ourselves.
Right.
And I think if you don't, and I'm just freewheeling here, but I think that if you don't do that, then all the tiny anchors you put on yourself, as I said, on the surface, they look innocent, but they will pull you under.
And it's funny because it just starts with one.
It really does.
One little one. And the train of thought that I often catch myself in with those is allowing it. it's so small. It's not that big of a deal. It's all right.
Yeah.
Boom. And then it's like now everything starts to cascade and fall down that path. Yeah.
So what are some, I'm going to think about this as you're answering, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What are some of those tiny anchors you think for you?
Man, I have them all over my life. Tiny anchors could be things like me giving into a compulsive thought about, let's say, eating a piece of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, like I'm now eating not only chocolate, but I'm eating like a little Danish here, Danish there. I want more of I'm moving away from my lifestyle of food that I consider to be healthy for myself. And now I'm like, let's say going out to eat to like a fast food place. It's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Like, but it started with a piece of candy.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're at the fast food piece. That's decision 15 of that. So I have to say, okay, we made we made it pretty far here. Let's reel that back in. So it starts with like one little anchor of candy. That's like in the food realm. Just in thinking in general of self judgment. I mean that could go from anything. Waking up a little later than I wanted to. I put this unrealistic expectation on myself, let's say.
Mm.
Um, and then I wake up and I'm already in that negative thought pattern that then cascades into these other decisions that I have to make.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as I wake up, I have to be like, all right, let's relax here. Let's take inventory. What are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into this, like, are you sure you want to go down that path? No, I don't want to because I know where that leads. Okay, so let's go this way. It could be triggered by a song. It could be triggered by an unconscious impulse to, like, let's say, go on social media. Yeah, I mean, man, it could just be really,
Right.
they just show up everywhere.
No, yeah, they do. And I think that the only way to bring them to the surface is by pausing and usually being held accountable by from someone else. I think people are easily swayed because they don't know what their value system is.
Ooh, that's good.
It isn't that doesn't anchor them. The big anchors are not there, so therefore they are reliant on the small anchors. Now, small anchors for me, things that are subconsciously weighing on me. I think it's in my language. I must do this. I should be doing it this way. I have to. I ought to. So I think there's very definitive language that determines if it's an anchor or not. If it's very definitive, it can easily become an anchor. And I'm not suggesting, I don't think you are either, that we become perfect. Obviously not. But because the road to stability is still sways, it's still winding. And it's just not letting it do this all
Right.
over the place, right?
It's reducing the
Yeah,
curves.
reducing the curves, reducing the sway, the ebb and flow, reducing it to where it's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only do that if you give yourself flexibility, and if you're saying shoulds and oughts and musts and so forth, then that's inflexible.
Right.
So maybe the anchors for me are best identified by asking myself, how often do I use that language? Does it predate that language? She should have had my food ready. She should have said I love you. She should have given me a kiss. I must get these reports done. I must show up. Hey, listen, all that's great, but that language, that's what turns it into something that's reasonable to something that's unreasonable.
Yeah. It's powerful.